The day I brought my newborn daughter home was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. Instead, it became the day my own parents threw me out of their house. I still remember standing on the front porch with my baby wrapped in a pink blanket, barely able to walk after giving birth. My body hurt. I hadn't slept properly in days. All I wanted was a safe place to recover and take care of my daughter. But my mother looked at me like I was a complete stranger. "You can't stay here anymore," she said coldly. At first, I thought I had heard her wrong. "What?" My father crossed his arms and avoided looking at me. "You heard your mother." I felt my stomach drop. I had nowhere else to go. 3 months earlier, my husband had abandoned me after learning I was pregnant. He emptied our joint account and disappeared with another woman. I lost my apartment shortly after because I couldn't keep up with the rent. My parents had promised I could stay with them until I got back on my feet, but now, only hours after leaving the hospital, they were throwing me out. I looked down at my daughter sleeping peacefully in my arms. "Please," I whispered. "I just gave birth." My mother's expression didn't change. "That's your problem, not ours." Those words hit harder than anything. Not because they were cruel, because they came from the woman who was supposed to love me. I felt tears forming, but I refused to let them fall. I had spent my entire life trying to earn my parents' approval. Nothing was ever enough. Good grades? Not enough. Scholarships? Not enough. Working 2 jobs through college? Still not enough. Meanwhile, my younger brother Ethan could do no wrong. If he failed a class, it wasn't his fault. If he lost money, someone else was responsible. If he needed help, my parents immediately rushed to save him. But when I needed help, suddenly I was on my own. And that wasn't even the worst part. A few weeks before giving birth, I accidentally overheard a conversation that made everything make sense. I had gone downstairs late at night to get a glass of water. My parents didn't know I was awake. That's when I heard my mother say something that stopped me cold. "Once she's gone, Ethan can have her room." I froze. My father laughed. And eventually the rest too. I stood there in silence. What did she mean by the rest? At the time, I convinced myself I was overthinking. I wanted to believe my parents would never actually abandon me. I was wrong. Standing on that porch with my newborn daughter in my arms, I finally understood. They had been planning this all along. My brother wanted more space. My parents wanted fewer responsibilities. And I had become an inconvenience. But then something happened that made the situation even worse. My mother stepped forward and handed me an envelope. I stared at it. "What's this?" "Your share." I slowly opened it. Inside was a check. For $500. $500. That was apparently what my parents thought my future and my daughter's future was worth. I looked at them in disbelief. My father shrugged. "It's more than generous." I couldn't even speak. The betrayal felt unreal. I wasn't asking them for luxury. I wasn't asking them to raise my child. I just needed a little time, a little support, a little kindness. Instead, they were treating me like a burden they couldn't wait to get rid of. Then my mother said something that shattered whatever hope I had left. "Maybe this is a lesson." I blinked. "A lesson? You should have made better choices." I felt like I had been punched in the chest. My husband abandoned me. I lost everything. I had just gone through one of the hardest experiences of my life. And somehow my mother believed it was all my fault. I stood there silently for several seconds. Then I picked up my diaper bag. If they wanted me gone so badly, I wouldn't beg. I turned and started walking away. My daughter slept peacefully against my chest. I had no idea where I was going. No idea where I would sleep that night. No idea how I would survive. But I knew one thing. I could never trust my parents again. As I reached the end of the driveway, I heard a car approaching. A black sedan slowly pulled up to the curb. At first, I ignored it. Then the driver's door opened, and my heart nearly stopped, because the man stepping out wasn't a stranger. It was my grandfather, the one person in the family who had always treated me with kindness. But he wasn't alone. A man in a dark suit stepped out behind him, carrying a leather briefcase. I didn't recognize him. My grandfather looked at my parents. Then he looked at me, holding my newborn daughter. His expression immediately darkened. What exactly is going on here? The silence that followed felt endless. Nobody answered. Nobody moved. And for the first time all day, I saw fear appear on my parents' faces. That's when everything changed. For a few seconds, nobody said a word. My parents stood frozen on the porch. I stood near the driveway holding my newborn daughter, and my grandfather slowly looked from one face to another. "What exactly is happening here?" he repeated. My mother forced a smile. "Oh, it's just a misunderstanding. I knew that tone. It was the same fake, sweet voice she used whenever she wanted to hide the truth. Grandpa wasn't buying it. A misunderstanding? He asked. His eyes shifted toward me. I was still carrying 2 bags and a newborn baby. I looked exhausted. Because I was. Grandpa's expression hardened. Then he noticed the tears I was trying to hide. What happened? I opened my mouth, but no words came out. The pain was too fresh. The humiliation was too overwhelming. But my father answered for me. We simply think it's time she learns responsibility. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Responsibility? I had spent the last 9 months preparing for my daughter. I worked until my doctor told me to stop. I attended every appointment alone. I survived after my husband abandoned me. And somehow I was the irresponsible one? Grandpa looked furious. She just gave birth. My mother crossed her arms. That doesn't mean we're obligated to support her forever. The lawyer standing beside Grandpa remained silent, but I noticed him paying very close attention. Almost like he was taking mental notes. That made me nervous, because I had no idea why he was there, and apparently neither did my parents. But that wasn't even the worst part. My brother Ethan suddenly walked out of the house. The moment he saw Grandpa, his entire attitude changed. Grandpa! He rushed forward wearing his usual fake smile. The same smile he used whenever he wanted money. The same smile my parents always fell for. But Grandpa barely acknowledged him. Instead, he asked a question that made everyone uncomfortable. Where is her room? The silence was immediate. Ethan looked away. My mother hesitated. And that told Grandpa everything. Without saying a word, he walked past them and entered the house. The lawyer followed. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. A few moments later, we heard Grandpa shout from inside. What is this? My stomach dropped. I already knew, because I had seen it 2 days earlier. My room was gone. Completely gone. The room I'd lived in for years had already been emptied. My clothes were packed into boxes. My daughter's crib was gone. The baby supplies were gone. Even the family photos had disappeared. In their place, a brand new gaming setup, large television, new furniture, expensive electronics. Everything belonged to Ethan. Grandpa walked back outside, looking angrier than I had ever seen him. You already gave her room away? Nobody answered, because there was no excuse. The truth was obvious. They hadn't decided to throw me out today. They had planned it weeks ago. Maybe months. My mother finally spoke. Ethan needed the space. Grandpa stared at her. And your granddaughter? No answer. And your daughter? Still no answer. I could see people peeking through nearby windows. Neighbors had started watching. The embarrassment on my parents' faces was growing. Good. For once, they couldn't hide behind their usual excuses. But then Ethan opened his mouth, and somehow made everything worse. She's always been dramatic. I looked at him in disbelief. Dramatic? He laughed. You act like you're some victim. That stunned me. I had spent years helping Ethan. When he lost jobs, I loaned him money. When he crashed his car, I helped pay for repairs. When he got into debt, I helped him again. And now he was standing there acting like I was the problem. Grandpa slowly turned toward him. What did you just say? For the first time, Ethan looked nervous. But instead of apologizing, he doubled down. She's always expected everyone to take care of her. I nearly laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. The one person who had been spoiled his entire life was accusing me of being dependent. That's when Grandpa did something unexpected. He looked at the lawyer. Open the file. Immediately, my parents' confidence disappeared. The lawyer calmly opened his briefcase. Several documents were inside. Official documents, legal documents, and suddenly my father looked pale. Very pale. My heart started racing. What was happening? Why was a lawyer here? Why did Grandpa seem so prepared? Then Grandpa looked directly at my parents. I gave both of you opportunities. Nobody spoke. I ignored the warning signs. Still silence. But what you did today crossed a line. My mother looked confused. What are you talking about? Grandpa didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at me. Then at my daughter. His expression softened. And for the first time that day, I felt safe. Just for a moment. Then he said something that changed everything. I know what you've been doing. The color drained from my parents' faces. My father immediately became defensive. We haven't done anything. The lawyer slid several papers out of the folder. Grandpa's voice became calm. Almost too calm. Then maybe you'd like to explain these. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. And suddenly I realized something. This wasn't a coincidence. Grandpa hadn't randomly shown up today. He came for a reason, a very specific reason. And whatever was inside that file, had my parents terrified? I thought things couldn't get worse. I was wrong. Because the secret Grandpa was about to reveal would destroy everything. My parents had spent years building, and nobody saw it coming. The moment Grandpa said, "Maybe you'd like to explain these," the entire atmosphere changed. My parents looked terrified. Not nervous, not uncomfortable, terrified. And that scared me too, because I had no idea what was inside those documents. The lawyer carefully placed several papers on the hood of the black sedan. Grandpa folded his arms. "Go ahead," he said to my father. "Explain." My father stared at the papers but didn't touch them. My mother suddenly stepped forward. "This is ridiculous." Her voice shook. It was the first time I had ever seen her lose control. Grandpa wasn't impressed. "Is it?" The lawyer opened another folder. Then he handed Grandpa a document. Grandpa looked directly at me. 3 months ago, I updated my estate plan. I blinked. What did that have to do with anything? I had never cared about Grandpa's money. Not once. Growing up, Grandpa always told me something important. Character matters more than inheritance. I believed him. So hearing him talk about estate plans felt completely out of place. But then he continued. I wanted to see how people behaved when they thought nobody was watching. Suddenly nobody looked comfortable. Especially my parents. Grandpa slowly shook his head. And unfortunately, I learned more than I wanted to. I felt a knot forming in my stomach. Something huge was coming. I could feel it. Then the lawyer handed me a copy of one document. At first, I didn't understand what I was reading, but when I looked closer, my blood ran cold. It was a bank statement. Not mine. My grandfather's. And there were several withdrawals highlighted in yellow. Large withdrawals. Thousands of dollars. Repeated over and over. I frowned. What is this? Grandpa looked at my father. Tell her. Silence. My father refused to look at me. That's when Grandpa answered himself. Your father has been taking money from me for years. I felt stunned. What? My mother immediately interrupted. That's not true. The lawyer calmly placed another document beside the first one. Then another. Then another. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, signed authorizations, transfer receipts, everything. My father couldn't deny it. Grandpa continued. I trusted him. His voice sounded more hurt than angry. And he abused that trust. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Growing up, my parents constantly criticized me about money. They called me irresponsible. They lectured me about budgeting. They blamed me whenever I needed help. Meanwhile, they had secretly been draining Grandpa's savings. But that wasn't even the worst part. Grandpa pointed toward Ethan. Tell her where the money went. Ethan looked away. That was all the answer I needed. The gaming setup, the vacations, the new car, the expensive electronics. Suddenly everything made sense. My parents weren't supporting Ethan. They were funding him using Grandpa's money for years. My head spun. The hypocrisy was unbelievable. Then the lawyer revealed another document. And that's when the real bombshell landed. There's more, Grandpa said quietly. My mother looked panicked. What more? The lawyer slid a property document across the table. I glanced at it, then looked again, because I thought I had read it wrong. The house we were standing in. It wasn't owned by my parents. It belonged to Grandpa. The entire time, my jaw dropped. What? Grandpa nodded. I purchased it years ago. The silence became deafening. My parents had spent my entire life acting like everything belonged to them. The house, the stability, the security. None of it was actually theirs. Grandpa continued. They were supposed to maintain it and eventually inherit it. My father's face turned pale. But after what happened today, he stopped. Nobody dared speak. Then Grandpa delivered the sentence that changed everything. They won't be inheriting anything. My mother gasped. My father looked like he might collapse. Even Ethan looked horrified. For years, they had treated Grandpa's future inheritance as if it already belonged to them. Now it was disappearing, right in front of them, and they knew it. My mother suddenly burst into tears. Real tears. Not because she regretted what she'd done, because she had been caught. I can explain, she said. Grandpa shook his head. No. My father finally spoke. Dad, don't do this. Grandpa's expression hardened. Don't do what? We're family. The irony nearly made me laugh. Family. The same people who had thrown me and a newborn. Baby onto the street only an hour. Earlier we're suddenly talking about family. Grandpa noticed it too. His eyes narrowed. Family? Nobody answered. He pointed toward me. Where was that concern when she needed help? Silence. He pointed toward my daughter. Where was it when your granddaughter came home from the hospital? Still silence. Then came the final revelation. The lawyer handed Grandpa one last folder. This one was much thinner, but somehow it felt more important. Grandpa looked at me, then smiled. A small smile, the kind he used whenever he was about to surprise me. And suddenly my parents looked terrified again, even more terrified than before. What is that? My mother whispered. Grandpa looked directly at her. The future. I had no idea what he meant, but one thing was certain. Whatever was inside that folder was about to change my life forever, and the people who had just thrown me out were about to regret it more than they could possibly imagine. My heart pounded as Grandpa held the final folder in his hands. Everyone was staring at it. My parents, Ethan, the lawyer, even the neighbors watching from their windows seemed frozen. Because somehow, everyone knew that whatever was inside that folder was important. Very important. Grandpa slowly opened it. Then he handed the papers directly to me. For a moment I just stared. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, still trying to process everything that had happened. But when I finally looked down at the documents, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My hands started shaking. Grandpa, my voice barely worked. The lawyer smiled softly. It's all legal. I looked at the first page again, then the second, then the third. The words didn't feel real. Because according to those documents, Grandpa had created a trust. Not for my parents, not for Ethan, for me. And for my daughter. I felt tears filling my eyes. Why? It was the only word I could manage. Grandpa stepped closer. Because someone in this family needed protection. The silence that followed was overwhelming. For years I had felt invisible. For years my parents treated me like I mattered less. For years Ethan had been their favorite. And now for the first time in my life someone had chosen me. Not out of pity, not out of obligation, because they believed I deserved it. Then Grandpa turned toward my parents, and the kindness disappeared from his face. I warned you. Nobody answered. I warned you for years. My father lowered his head. My mother looked like she might faint. But Grandpa wasn't finished. The lawyer opened another document. This trust becomes effective immediately. My parents exchanged terrified looks. Then Grandpa delivered the final blow. And the house is being transferred into the trust. My mother's eyes widened. No. My father looked stunned. Dad, no, Grandpa interrupted. You lost the right to call me that when you threw your daughter onto the street. The words hit like a hammer. Nobody spoke. Because there was nothing left to say. The truth was out. The masks were gone. And everyone could finally see who they really were. But that wasn't even the most satisfying part. A week later, my parents received official notice. Since the property belonged to Grandpa and had been placed into the trust, their living arrangement was ending. Not immediately. Grandpa wasn't cruel. He gave them time. More kindness than they had shown me. But the message was clear. The free ride was over. And suddenly reality hit them. Hard. For the first time in years, they would have to stand on their own. No hidden money, no inheritance plans, no safety net. Meanwhile, Ethan's situation became even worse. Without Grandpa's financial support, he couldn't maintain his lifestyle. The expensive car was gone. The luxury spending stopped. The endless excuses finally ran out, and for once nobody rushed to save him. I heard through relatives that he blamed everyone except himself, which didn't surprise me, but what happened next did. About a month later, my father called me. The first call I had received from him since that day. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. When I picked up, there was silence. Then I heard his voice. He sounded older, smaller somehow. I made mistakes. I waited. Part of me wanted to hear more. Part of me didn't. I should have protected you. My throat tightened, because that was all I had ever wanted. Not money, not gifts, not special treatment, just a father who cared. For a moment, I considered forgiving everything. Then I remembered standing on that porch holding my newborn baby. I remembered begging for help. I remembered my mother's cold expression. And I remembered the check for $500. Some wounds don't disappear overnight. I hope you've changed, I told him. Then I ended the call. Not out of anger. out of peace, because revenge wasn't what healed me. The truth did. The exposure did. The justice did. And that's when I realized something important. The greatest punishment wasn't losing the inheritance. It wasn't losing the house. It wasn't even the public embarrassment. The greatest punishment was that they had destroyed their relationship with me and with their granddaughter, a relationship they could never get back. No amount of money could fix that. No apology could erase it. Some choices leave permanent scars, and they had made theirs. A few months later, I moved into a beautiful home purchased through the trust. Nothing extravagant, just safe, comfortable, peaceful. The kind of home every child deserves. The kind of home I wished I had growing up. Every night, I held my daughter and promised her something. She would never wonder whether she was loved. She would never compete for affection. She would never have to earn basic kindness, because family should never feel like a battlefield. And I intended to break that cycle forever. But the story wasn't quite over, because one final conversation with Grandpa would teach me a lesson I would carry for the rest of my life. About 6 months after everything happened, life looked completely different. For the first time in years, I wasn't surviving. I was living. My daughter was healthy and growing fast. Every morning, her laughter filled our home. Every tiny milestone felt like a reminder that despite everything, we had made it. The fear that had followed me for so long was finally starting to fade. But there was one conversation I still couldn't stop thinking about. The conversation I needed to have with Grandpa. One evening, after putting my daughter to sleep, I drove to his house. He was sitting on the porch in his favorite chair, watching the sunset, just like he had done my entire life. When he saw me, he smiled. "There's my favorite granddaughter." I laughed. "You only have one granddaughter." "Exactly," he said. For a while, we sat in silence, the comfortable kind. The kind that only exists between people who genuinely care about each other. Then I finally asked the question that had been bothering me for months. "When did you know?" Grandpa looked toward the horizon. "I suspected something years ago." I frowned. "Years?" He nodded. "I noticed how differently they treated you." That hurt to hear. Not because it was new, because it was true. Even as a child, I knew I was treated differently. I just spent years pretending otherwise. I kept hoping they would change, Grandpa continued. I thought eventually they'd realize what they were doing. But they didn't. No. His answer was quiet, simple, final. Then he looked directly at me. "Do you know what disappointed me most?" I shook my head. It wasn't the money. It wasn't the lies. It wasn't even the greed. I waited. It was watching good people hurt someone who loved them. Those words stayed with me because they perfectly described what had happened. I spent years loving people who didn't know how to love me back, and that wasn't my fault. For so long I believed something was wrong with me. Maybe I wasn't successful enough. Maybe I wasn't smart enough. Maybe I wasn't lovable enough. But sitting there beside Grandpa, I finally understood the truth. Their behavior was a reflection of them, not me. And that realization changed everything. Over the following months, I focused on building a better life. Not a perfect life, a peaceful one. I found stable work. I made new friends. I created routines with my daughter. Slowly, our house became a home, filled with laughter instead of criticism, filled with support instead of judgment, filled with love instead of conditions. Every now and then, relatives would update me about my parents. Apparently, things weren't going well. The inheritance they counted on was gone. The financial help they depended on was gone. Most importantly, the family image they worked so hard to maintain had collapsed. People knew the truth. Not because I told them, because their own actions exposed them. Karma didn't arrive through revenge. It arrived through consequences. And consequences are often much harder to escape. One afternoon, nearly a year after that day on the porch, I received a letter. Not a text. Not a phone call. A handwritten letter. From my mother. I stared at it for several minutes before opening it. Inside was a simple apology. No excuses. No blaming. No manipulation. Just an apology. I read it twice. Then a third time. And for the first time in my life, I believed she meant it. Did it erase the past? No. Did it fix everything? Absolutely not. But it mattered. Because accountability matters. Growth matters. And sometimes people change only after they lose everything. I never fully rebuilt my relationship with my parents. Some damage runs too deep. But I stopped carrying the anger. Not for them, for me. Because anger is heavy, and I was tired of carrying it. The greatest gift Grandpa gave me wasn't the trust. It wasn't the house. It wasn't the financial security. It was clarity. He showed me that my worth was never determined by people who failed to see it. He showed me that family isn't defined by blood alone. Family is defined by love. by loyalty, by the people who stand beside you when life falls apart. A few weeks ago, I watched my daughter take her first steps across our living room. Grandpa was there, cheering louder than anyone. When she reached him, he scooped her into his arms and laughed. A real laugh, the kind that comes from pure happiness. And in that moment, I realized something. If my parents had never thrown me out, if Grandpa had never arrived with that lawyer, if the truth had never come out, I might still be begging for love from people unwilling to give it. Instead, I found something better. Peace, security, freedom, and a future built on genuine love. So if there's one lesson in my story, it's this. Never measure your value by the people who refuse to see it. The people who truly love you won't make you earn their kindness. They won't abandon you when you're struggling. And they certainly won't throw you out when you need them most. Sometimes the worst day of your life becomes the beginning of your best chapter. For me, that chapter started the moment my parents closed the door, and my grandfather opened one.